So I wanted to talk to you today about a great book called Chasing the Scream by Johan Hari, which is about the war on drugs, the failed war on drugs. And I recently listened to the audio book. It's very long, and I wanted to give you the essence of it so you can understand what is going on with this war on drugs that has been fought for the last 100 years, just about, mostly by the US government, and then it's been sent across the whole world because of the US government forced it on the rest of the world, where drugs like cannabis, cocaine, heroin, LSD, all the different illegal drugs have been made illegal because they didn't used to be illegal until 1917. And I wanted to just give you an overview of this book and what he talks about and some of the options, because I had no idea about this stuff. And I think it's very important we realize what is really going on here, because this war on drugs is actually costing far more lives and causing way, way, way more problems in the world than it is solving. And it's completely dysfunctional and isn't really doing anyone any good. So first of all, I just want to mention that when I was a teenager, I did all sorts of illegal drugs, drank a lot of alcohol, and then I stopped doing drugs when I was 18. Funnily enough, in England, when you get to 18, you're allowed to drink alcohol. As soon as I turned 18, I lost interest in drinking, which is quite funny because as soon as I was allowed to do it, it wasn't exciting anymore. And I also kind of gave up all kinds of drugs because I just didn't feel the need to do them anymore after I started doing meditation. So the reason I'm sharing this isn't because I'm wanting to legalize drugs so that I can take them myself. I actually think they should be legal, as you'll understand, but not because I want to consume them, but for other reasons. So I've got a few notes here because this is a 14-hour book, right? And I'm just going to condense this down so you can get the essence of it as quickly as possible. So, as I'm sure you're aware, drugs have been given a bad name in the media and in general. The idea, don't just say no, and the idea that drugs are evil and any drug is kind of going to ruin people's lives. And the idea is that there are these substances around, and if you consume them, then what happens is your body is going to become addicted, and once your body becomes addicted, then you're forever going to be in a terrible, terrible state, and there's nothing you can do about it. And it looks like that's the case. If you look at, for example, heroin addicts on the streets that have got all these kind of pus coming out of them and lesions, and they look very just like as if they're about to die, yeah? And you see people stealing and smashing stuff and all this. It looks like drugs are a serious problem, and it seems like they are. But we're only seeing one very, very small side of this whole thing. And as it turns out, drug use and drug addiction is broken into two different categories. There is physical dependence, which is the physical addiction. Like if you smoke cigarettes, you get addicted to nicotine. And then if you don't get nicotine, your body starts to crave it and you have withdrawal. Same thing with heroin. Yeah, same thing with caffeine. Yeah, if you stop drinking coffee, you'll have 2 days of headaches and then you'll be all right. So there's the physical dependence is one thing, and then the addiction is actually something else, because we can be addicted to gambling, we can be addicted to video games, we can be addicted to Facebook. These are not physical dependence, but they're addictive anyway. Yeah, so we can be addicted to things that aren't having physical dependence. And it turns out that physical dependence in cigarette use, for example, people who are addicted to cigarettes, you can get nicotine patches, yeah, which give you the nicotine that you would get from the cigarettes. And guess what? People still want to smoke cigarettes when they have those nicotine patches on, even though they've got tons of nicotine in their body, because physical dependence is only a small percentage of what's going on. The real addiction is something else. It's internal, it's in our mind, yeah? So addiction is primarily a psychological need. And in this book, Chasing the Scream, one of the main points that he makes is that addiction of any kind, whether it's drug addiction or any other addiction, is a result of lack of bonding, So all of us have an innate need to connect with other people, to bond with love in our hearts, with others, to connect with our environment, to have a beautiful relationship with the world around us. And if we lose that feeling of bonding and connecting, that feeling of deep connection, nourishing connection that we need as spiritual beings, as human beings, then if we haven't got it with people or in a healthy way, then we turn to other things to bond with, yeah? So if someone doesn't have any friends in their life, they might spend the whole time watching TV or doing drugs or playing games or avidly reading or something like this, because we need to bond with something, yeah? So we're always looking to bond with something or other. And what's happened, and this is an interesting connection between drugs and consumerism, right? So around 1920s or so in America, the government realized that in order to expand the economy, one of the most effective ways that they saw was to increase consumerism, the GDP, yeah, gross domestic product. And if people buy more stuff, then that goes up and that kind of expands the economy as more jobs. And so the government gave the mission to the advertising companies, look, go hardcore on promoting stuff for people to buy, because before them people weren't buying all these stupid things they didn't need. Yeah, all this whole culture of mass consumption is a result of huge amounts of marketing and advertising that started around the 1920s and started getting more and more towards the Second World War, and then it exploded after the 1950s. Yeah, so there's massive advertising has gone into this extreme, endless marketing, which we're all pissed off about. Yeah, this endless buy this new thing, buy this new thing. So what happened is, when they started doing all this advertising, people started thinking they needed all this stuff in order to fit in with the culture and be loved. So instead of just being lovable and having families, we now felt we had to buy all these things. And by wanting all this stuff, by basically bonding with physical things and cars and toys and stuff, we stopped bonding as much with people, which is much more nourishing, having real relationships. So people started to become more depressed, more lonely, more isolated. So our wealth level, our level of wealth and level of physical stuff has gone up and up and up and up and up since the 1950s. But at the same time, our depression level has gone up, and our anxiety level has gone up, and our sense of loneliness has gone up along with it. So people are now 4 to 8 times richer than they were in the 1950s, but they're also about the same amount more depressed, anxious and stressed, because we're bonding with things that don't give us what we need. And so when we feel lonely, instead of wanting to connect with other people, because we kind of like lost the connection with others generally as a culture, so people start to bond with stuff and then with drugs. So the rise of drug use is proportionate to the rise of loneliness. So the more lonely someone is, the more they need bonding, and the more they bond with things that make them feel better. So for example, heroin, while I haven't done heroin myself, I know people who have done it, and they say that when someone's feeling a lot of pain, a lot of anxiety, they take heroin, and they say they feel like this warm glow over them. It's like a warm blanket, and everything feels okay. They feel like they're loved. It's kind of like being comforted. So people take heroin to feel comforted. Why do people take antidepressants? To feel happier, to feel less depressed. Why do people drink? To get out of their head so they feel intoxicated. Why do people smoke cannabis? So all these different drugs give us a feeling that is better than the pain we were feeling because we are lonely and lacking bonding. So this is just a good thing to realize, that drug use is connected to loneliness and lack of bonding. And as people's level of connection increases, the interest in drugs and addiction drops. And an interesting study on this was done, you might have seen this. They have a rat in a cage. You probably heard about this study. They put a rat in a cage and they give them two different kinds of water to drink. One is normal water and one is water with cocaine mixed in it or heroin mixed in it. Yeah, so they got water and then drug-induced water. And if a rat is in a cage by itself, it will drink the drug-induced water, the cocaine or heroin water, drink it until it kills itself. Yeah, and they try another rat, and then the rat again drinks until it kills itself. Doesn't drink the normal water, drinks the drug water until it dies. Yeah, and then because of that experiment, people said, well, look how evil these substances are. Look what's going to happen to human beings. But one of these researchers did another experiment and was testing out what's really going on here. So what he did is he created what's called Rat Park, which is like a happy rat place, where there's all these slides and coloured balls and loads of other rats, and it was kind of like a rat amusement park. It was kind of like rat heaven, yeah? Put loads of rats in, and so they got this wonderful big place with all these cool things to do, and they've still got the same thing, normal water and heroin water and cocaine water, yeah? So they've still, it's the same experiment, same drinking source, except it's now a big rat park. Guess what happened? Did they all drink the heroin, cocaine water and kill themselves? No, they didn't. None of them killed themselves with that water. They wanted the normal water. So in other words, when the rats felt comfortable and happy in a happy environment, they weren't interested in taking the intoxicating drug. But when they were isolated in their own cage, then they felt depressed and they needed to bond with that drug substance. Another researcher that talks about in the book studied how all animal species, from cats to elephants to different bird species, they all take drugs at various times. And he gave an example of where there was a flock of birds, I can't remember what kind of birds they were, and they had these hallucinogenic drugs around, and they took them and they kind of stumbled around and then they stopped taking them because they didn't like it. But one of the birds, its mate died, and it saw its mate die, and after it kind of lost that connection, it started taking the drugs because it was sad. Yeah, so animals take drugs when they're sad. The rats took it, these birds took it, different animals take it when they feel bad, they take drugs. Humans take drugs when they feel bad, but we don't need to take drugs, or we have way less interest in drugs when we feel good. And I can say that for myself. When I was having a horrible life, I was taking drugs all the time. All I could think about was getting more weed, getting drunk, taking LSD, taking magic mushrooms, ecstasy. Yeah, I took all sorts of different drugs all the time, and that's all I wanted all the time because I was depressed. But when I started feeling better about my life, then I just didn't have any interest. Like, I honestly don't have any interest in doing drugs. I do drink caffeine, I have to admit. I like mate tea. I also like a cup of coffee now and again. But other than that, I don't do any drugs. Whereas I used to be absolutely addicted to it when I felt depressed. Yeah. So when we're not bonding, when we're not connecting, when we feel something is lacking, then we need drugs to feel better. Understandably, we don't like feeling bad. So it's good to know that drug consumption, drug use, so when we see people who are considered junkies, yeah, serious drunk junkies, instead of seeing them as these terrible criminals, which is they've been labeled as evil criminal people who have been taken by the drug, it's not really like that. They're lonely people who want to connect with others. And one of the things he talks about in the book is that junkies, serious drug users, heroin addicts, they actually have a subculture of drugs. So if someone is addicted to heroin and they're on the streets with other heroin addicts, it's not just the heroin that they're addicted to. They also have all their friends who are doing the same thing. So they kind of bond with other people as well, yeah? So these are all very interesting things that no one really talks about, that drug use is a sign of lack of bonding, wanting to connect. Not all drug use, I think there can be certain I've experienced when I did LSD certain realizations about life, but I realized that continuously taking ayahuasca or LSD to have a spiritual experience is a big problem, because it's not a real experience. You should be able to have it on your own because it's natural. Yeah, so I think it can give you like a little lift ceremoniously now and again, but ultimately, if we want to have higher consciousness, we don't need the drugs. We got to kind of find that higher consciousness. And what drugs do, I'm not sure if you realize this, is what they do is when we take a drug, it removes the ego temporarily. The lower consciousness within us is temporarily moved out of the way, which is why we feel good. Yeah. So when I was a teenager, I used to do various drugs, and when I did them, I felt like something was cleared. Yeah, like it says in Aldous Huxley says, the doors of perception, like the window is clean. It's like, yeah, you clean it, and then you're like, thank God I can see clearly. I feel better. Yeah. So what drugs do is they clean the ego off temporarily. The lower consciousness is removed, and we naturally feel higher consciousness. Then when the drug wears off, the ego comes back in again. So it's not that the drugs actually give us anything. They just remove temporarily the blocks, psychological blocks. And the reason I've not been doing drugs for the last 20 years is because as I've developed more and more meditation and higher consciousness, I've experienced higher drug-like states. I wouldn't call them drug-like states, but high states of intoxication and high, spiritual intoxication, like I did with drugs, but without drugs, because it's a consciousness shift that is really happening. So really, all drugs and alcohol and all these things, what we're looking for is a higher state of consciousness, not the drug itself. The drug just gives us a higher state of consciousness, basically. And this isn't what Johan Hari talks about, but this is something that I think is worth knowing about. So we've got this war on drugs, all right? So the war on drugs happened around 1917, where before that you could buy, heroin, opium products in stores, like it was in cough medicine, and Coca-Cola had cocaine in it. So you could buy all these different sorts of drugs legally, right? Then they said, right, let's put an end to the drugs. And there's a guy called, what's his name? Hari Anslinger, yeah? Hari Anslinger. And you can check him out on Google and watch some of his adverts. His propaganda adverts are so funny. And he basically claimed that if someone was to smoke marijuana, they would become immediately insane and become a killer. That was the claim. So everyone in America is like, oh my God, let's get rid of cannabis, get rid of marijuana, because we'll all become insane killers, And basically what happened here, and I think on a deeper level, is that we human beings tend to be a bit lazy, yeah? And we don't like to think about how complicated situations create complicated results, yeah? We tend to want to think that if you buy a lottery ticket, you make $1 million. It's like, what's the best way to make $1 million? Buy a lottery ticket. You buy the ticket, you make $1 million. That's simple, yeah? Get the ticket, get the million. Or drugs are evil, and if anyone takes any drugs, then they're all going to become evil. That's like such a massively simplified situation. So most people can't be bothered to do any research, can't be bothered to think about things. So if you're presented a really simplistic argument, like drugs are evil, if you take drugs you're going to be addicted forever, then we tend to just say, okay, fine, it's easier than me thinking about this myself. So when this war on drugs came out, the propaganda given to the American people was that the drug substances are going to make you physically dependent and make you insane, and then you're going to be one of these crazy people on the street doing terrible crimes. Yeah? Which of course isn't true, because a lot of people do drugs and don't get addicted. Like, for example, morphine. Morphine is an opiate, yeah? So it's like heroin. It's stronger than heroin, actually. Morphine is like pure heroin, potent opiate. People take morphine all the time when they go to hospital. Yeah, morphine and morphine-like products are used on a regular basis in hospitals across the world. And most of the people who go in for operations and are on morphine do not become heroin addicts afterwards. Yeah, only a very small percentage continue wanting morphine after they've got off the problem. Yeah, but the narrative that we're told is that drugs, if you take a drug like heroin, like morphine, opiates, then you're going to get addicted to it and you're never going to get off it. It's not true. In the Vietnam War, the soldiers were not able to get cannabis because the sniffer dogs sniffed out all the cannabis. So they would wait, because of course in the war they're totally stressed out, getting shot all over the place, they're having a horrible time, so they want to smoke weed, right? Understandably, having a bad time. Couldn't get their weed because the sniffer dogs stopped it. So they started doing heroin. So 20% of the Vietnam War people were basically heroin consumers. And this was a shocking fact, and everyone thought, oh my God, when all these soldiers come back, there's going to be a whole world of zombies and heroin addicts taking over the country. And it turned out that when the war ended and the soldiers came back, yeah, instead of them all being addicted, 95% of the soldiers stopped taking heroin on their return to the United States. Yeah, because they came back and they weren't in the war anymore. They felt, thank God I'm not in this war. They were surrounded with their family and friends, and they could bond with people. They were glad to be alive. So most of them, even though they were addicted to heroin in Vietnam, they stopped being addicted to heroin when they got back. Just the same way as that a lot of people, you could say they've had enough morphine to be addicted, but they're not addicted. Do you see what I mean? So the idea that physical dependence is the cause, drugs make you an evil person because once you take them you get addicted and you can't get off it. That's a false argument, because there's countless examples of people who've stopped smoking or got off heroin or stopped drinking, or one of these situations that's physically addictive, and they've been all right and they've given it up, yeah, easily. So the actual issue is that we need to bond with other people. But we've been told that drugs themselves, these chemicals, are toxic and evil and they're going to kill everyone, which is not the case at all. So what we like to do is we like to scapegoat things. So instead of people recognizing that the real problem is actually consumerism and loneliness and people wasting their lives doing pointless things, and a brainwashed culture, instead of realizing that we're living in a hypnotic trance, running around after silly things, wasting our lives, we'd rather just blame it on drugs. So the drugs become illegal, and there's this war on drugs, which means that anyone who's selling drugs is a criminal, and there's a huge department, yeah? Huge department in the government. The Drug Enforcement Agency, I think it's DEA, is trying to stop drugs. Now, what happens when you make something illegal? So prohibition of alcohol in the 1920s, yeah? They made alcohol illegal in America for 13 years, yeah? What happened? Did alcohol go away? No, of course it didn't go away. It became illegal, but people were smuggling it in. So everyone was still drinking alcohol. But what happened? The alcohol consumption remained roughly the same. It did go down a little bit because people couldn't get it as easily. Yeah, so there was a reduction in alcohol consumption. But also what happened is people who wanted it still were drinking it. And this is very interesting, there's a thing called the iron fist, which is something that happens when you make something illegal. It creates this iron fist. And what it means is that if alcohol's legal, yeah, you can buy it, then people like to drink beer, they like to drink wine, they like to drink light beers, they like to drink different kinds of alcohol. Spirits is not like the main thing people drink. But if it's illegal, then if you have a truckload of alcohol, a truckload of beer is not going to get you very far because it's only 4 or 5% proof, yeah? Whereas a truckload of strong whiskey, 45%, 40%, you can get a lot more bang for your buck. So all of a sudden, when something's illegal, the only stuff that people can get their hands on is potent drugs, potent alcohol. So in Prohibition, spirit drinking just went up really high. They also had huge amounts of weird spirits that were made that were toxic, and tons of people died of liver problems because of bad alcohol. Same thing with drugs. When drugs are illegal, then they want to bring in the most potent drugs. So heroin, cocaine, crack, and all these things become the norm, because it's that even if all drugs were legal, right, people would have all sorts of more sort of fancy drugs that were lighter and a lot more kind of fun and less severe. But if it's illegal, then the only thing you have is strong, potent drugs, because the risk of getting drugs into the country is such a hassle and so high that there's no point in trying unless it's strong enough, which is why cannabis, normal cannabis, wasn't that strong. Now it's super skunk, and now it's the most potent kind of weed you can get, cannabis oil and all these things. So the iron fist is that when you make something illegal, you get the punch. They are always interested in the biggest punch. So in other words, anything that's illegal becomes kaboom, kaboom, kaboom. Yeah. So that means that people who want it get hardcore punch. It also means that the quality of the drugs available is very poor. So when heroin is prescribed to people, like in England, heroin has been prescribed at different times for people who are addicts. So they get high quality heroin, and they go to a particular place and they inject themselves in like a safe environment with good needles. Guess what happens? Those people, they seem fine, they don't look sick, they don't have overdoses, there's no overdoses, they kind of manage themselves quite well, relatively. When it's illegal, heroin is mixed with all sorts of crap, so that the other stuff that they're injecting into their body, plus dirty needles, is killing people off, yeah? So when you make things illegal, people get poor quality drugs that ends up making them very, very sick. And then, because it's illegal, they're considered criminals. And then they get put in jail, and they get a criminal record. And then they can't get a job, and so they're kind of stuck in a life of crime. So drug users end up getting screwed because it's illegal, because they have crap drugs, they get criminal records, they get treated really badly, they think of themselves as terrible people. And so many people who have done even small things like cannabis and get put in jail for it, their life is ruined over something super trivial, which is like a massive problem for tons and tons of people already. Now, that's only part of the problem. The bigger problem is that illegal drugs are put into the hands of gangs and criminals, and gangs and criminals become ruthless with each other because they have a war for drugs. So it means that, like with pharmacists, you don't have pharmacists driving by and blowing each other's shop up and like having shotguns and shooting each other's faces off and like cutting their heads off and putting their hand, all this like severe violence doesn't happen with pharmacies. Yeah, obviously you've never seen anything like that. But when you put it in the hands of criminal gangs, then they're killing each other for their kind of like spot. This is my place on the block. Have respect. If there's all this gang wars, which is killing tons and tons of kids in the inner cities. It's killing random people who just get in the way. The police are fighting all these crimes and all these gangs. This whole thing, all this massive violence, huge amounts of violence and terrible lives, is created because of making it illegal. And it's not just the drug dealers. There's different levels of drug dealers. So there's people on the streets, they're all fighting with each other. And then there's bigger drug dealers fighting with each other. And then you have the smugglers who have to go through the border from Mexico a lot of the time to the United States, or various drug routes. Yeah, they're all having crazy shit happening all over the place. And then in Mexico, for example, the cartels, the drug cartels, are pretty much running the country. Yeah, there's corruption everywhere because of the drug cartels, which America ultimately has funded all these massive drug cartels, given them power, because if people could just buy drugs legally, they would all go out of business. So millions and millions of people's lives have been completely ruined as a result of drugs being illegal, right? And let's be honest, has all this war on drugs stopped people doing drugs? Of course it hasn't. People do loads of drugs. Millions of people are doing drugs all the time. So it's not like it's stopped anything. All it's done is given huge amounts of money and huge amounts of power to very dangerous people. It's created massive amounts of violence. It's made the drug users themselves to become criminals and not get well, because if you punish somebody for being a drug user when in fact they just need bonding and they need help and they need a better life, instead of helping them out, you punish them, it makes them worse, and it continues them being drug users. So the war on drugs is propagating drug use. It's making people more and more and more addicted. It's giving huge power to the drugs and the drug dealers and gangs. It's causing massive amounts of violence. It's creating poor quality drugs for people who do take them. It's creating overdoses. So in other words, the war on drugs has cost countless more lives than it would have been if it was all legal. And instead of helping people get off their drugs, they make them more addicted to drugs because they actually need love and support rather than more stick and more stick. Because if someone's having a bad day, it doesn't matter how much you threaten them, they're going to need their drugs to feel better. Yeah? So if they feel bad, if someone is feeling terrible and you kick them in the face when they're feeling bad, how is that going to help them? That's basically what the war on drugs is doing. It's kicking people in the face who need help. So, you by all means read this book, it's full of stories. But in essence, if everything was made legal, the amount of people who do drugs would roughly be the same as it is now. It might go up very, very slightly. But the quality of drugs would be higher. People would take less hard drugs because they wouldn't need to. All these drugs and drug dealers and gangs would be out of business, and they'd have to get proper jobs and not be like hugely monstrous, evil force in the world. Government would actually have money, instead of wasting it on all this law enforcement and kicking people's heads in and ruining people's lives, they could actually help people out. And the whole world would be a much, much, much better place. And like I said, I am not interested in doing any drugs, but I'm in favour of complete legalization of all drugs. And there's a way of doing that that's mentioned in this book that is very, very sensible. So instead of it being a massive problem, because in Portugal they didn't legalize, but they decriminalized drug use in 2001, and they noticed a slight increase in drug use, minor, but relative to the rest of Europe, it's basically less it's slightly up in some ways, but down in other ways. So in other words, roughly the same, except people are getting better. People are actually doing less hard drugs than they used to. Because, for example, heroin, when it's illegal, more people do heroin. Why is that? Because the people who do heroin need to spend a lot of money to get their heroin. So they end up buying a bigger amount of heroin, and then they're selling it to their friends. They want other people to become addicted so that they can get their cut. This is what happened to me when I was smoking cannabis. I thought, well, I want to smoke my weed, so I would buy more cannabis and then sell it to other people so that I didn't have to pay. Yeah, and this is the case with a lot of people. So if we make drugs legal, all these middlemen, all this weird illegal stuff will go away. People want to smoke weed, they'll smoke it anyway. If they want to do drugs, they'll do it anyway, but they'll do it less and they'll have better quality, and they'll actually have help to get them off drugs if they need help. And the world will become a much safer place. So in other words, instead of thinking that drugs make the world unsafe, I think it's better to realize that making drugs illegal and having a war on drugs has made the world considerably more dangerous than it ever has been. And the United States government forced all these other governments to go along with their war on drugs. And even now, I just saw something where the DEA is trying to make cannabis oil illegal and a class 1 drug, right? So I don't know exactly what's going on here, but somehow the US government is making a lot of money by making this illegal. Maybe it's just that they take a lot of taxpayers' money and there's a huge department and they want to keep funding it. And if it was legal, they would lose their massive funding, something like that. I don't know what their exact reason is, but there's corruption going on because we would all be a lot safer. And drug users and serious drug addicts would also be a lot safer if everything was actually decriminalized and then made legal. So hopefully this has been an interesting little overview for you. Let me think if there's anything else here. No, I think we're pretty good. So read the book. It's called Chasing the Scream by Johan Hari. It's about 14-hour long audiobook, so I've kind of given you the essence. And think about these things for yourself. And next time you see someone who's a drug addict, realize that it's not that they're an evil person consumed by substances. What really is happening is this is someone who's in pain, who is wanting to relieve their pain. That's all it is. All drugs is someone wanting to relieve their pain. All addictions are a desire to reduce pain. And when we give people options to feel better, naturally, then their interest in the addictions and the drugs just goes away. And I'm living proof of this because I used to be totally addicted and now I'm not because I feel better, yeah? So have compassion for yourself if you are currently, addicted to some kind of drug or substance, and have compassion for others and understand that really the safest solution for us as a world is to legalize drugs and provide drug education and provide support for people to have a better life. So if we really want to solve the problem, we need to learn how to have a good life, how to be loving with each other, and how to enjoy being alive, yeah? Because the more we enjoy being alive, the happier we feel and the less we feel we need to do anything. And the more miserable we are, the more we feel the need to bond with unhealthy things. So, have a beautiful day. Hope you found this useful. And aloha.